Welcome to the Lean to the Left podcast, where we explore the key social issues of our time in the context of politics today. Our topic is teenage depression and the disturbingly high rate of suicide among young people. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, suicide is the second leading cause of death for adolescents between the ages of 10 and 14, and the leading cause of death for those between 15 and 25. That's tragic. And to help us understand, we present today internal medicine physician Dr. Scott Kolbaba of Chicago, who served in the Marine Corps Reserve and then went to medical school at the University of Illinois College of Medicine, where he graduated with honors, completing his residency at the Mayo Clinic. He's been recognized as a top doctor in Chicago Magazine. His recent children's book, Clara's Magic Garden, an Amazon bestseller, explores a young girl's journey through depression to find her purpose and happiness. But before we get to that, I want to urge you guys to visit our podcast, leantotheleft.net website, where you'll find thumbnails and links to our episodes. You can subscribe there too. And don't forget to give us a rating. 5 stars would be cool. So thank you, Dr. Kolbaba, for joining us on the Lean to the Left podcast.
It's great to be here.
Hey, I understand that there was an incident in your work involving a young girl who was in a coma from a drug overdose that prompted you to join in the battle against teenage depression. Can you share that story with us, Dr. Kolbaba?
Sure, Bob. There was quite an event. I was called to the emergency room. They call it the emergency department now, ED. As I was approaching the room where I was going, everything was bustling and like it is in the emergency room, and I could hear someone sobbing inside that room, and that gave me a funny feeling inside because I knew that somebody was in big trouble. They opened the door. There was a mom holding a little girl's hand. She was 13 years old, Bob. Can you imagine? 13 years old.
Wow.
She was pale as a ghost, looked like death, and she was in a deep coma, drug overdose from depression. What I did then is the usual kinds of things. I whisked her off to the ICU. We intubated her. We pumped her stomach. We did all the stuff that you do for a drug overdose. And 13-year-olds are pretty resilient, and she survived. The parents, I think, suffered more than she did, actually. But I was changed too after that episode. To see a 13-year-old girl, that's a beautiful girl. That was tragic. And I thought to myself, I'm a single doc here. I do internal medicine, and what can I do to change what's happening? And then I started to do a little research and found some of the same statistics that you just mentioned earlier. The number of, especially teenage girls, 3 out of 5 teenage girls now admit to being depressed, according to the CDC. That's a huge number.
Yeah.
1 in 3 have seriously considered suicide. And so I wanted to do something because it just moved me so much to see her and to think about all the hospitals in the country with little girls and boys that are arriving in a coma or maimed or injured from a suicide attempt or from serious depression. So I decided to write a book that we called Clara's Magic Garden. It's about a little girl, and I've got 7 kids, so I've got a bunch of girls, and every one of them never thinks they're pretty enough or has enough friends, or you know how that goes. Do you have kids too, Bob?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So that's a universal complaint. And so I thought, how can I influence those kids? And the book is about a little girl that is like that. She doesn't think she has many friends. She doesn't think she's pretty enough, and so forth.
Right.
And so she has a little magic garden, which is actually our backyard. We use our backyard as a setting for the book. And she finds some seeds that she plants in the garden, and the little bush grows up, and the bush is plain and ordinary, and no one in the garden likes the bush because it's so plain and ordinary, like she thinks she is.
Right.
Well, at the end of the season, the bush turns into a burning bush that becomes absolutely gorgeous. It's all red and beautiful in color.
Right.
And so the bush then realizes that maybe it is special, and she does too. She finally comes around and thinks that maybe I'm okay, maybe I'm special too. So I wanted to get, especially girls, but boys too, to realize that they are special, that they have a purpose in this life. But that wasn't enough for me. I'm a busybody. I like to do things in a big way. As you
I
can
see
see, I've got.
that. I I read that you grow giant pumpkins.
We were talking about doing things in a big way. I do. We did have grown giant pumpkins, which is a lot of fun for the kids. And we've won actually one of the major festivals in the state of Illinois, 2 years running, the Sycamore Pumpkin Festival, and with our giant pumpkins. So that's a crazy thing. It may have been the birth control pills we planted in the garden. I'm not sure. Or the underground watering system that I put in for a couple $100. In any event, we also fly the biggest kites on the beach, and we usually have the biggest family of 7 kids that shows up on vacation. So we have a lot of fun. But so the book that I wrote, I wanted to do a little bit more than that. So that's what we're doing now. I'm doing a number of podcasts, and we're applying for a TEDx talk because I think it's important to realize what the problem is and that we actually have found a potential solution. And we've been trying to promote that because when I was in the psych unit talking to the nurses and the psychologists there, I said, how many of these kids that we have in the unit now have a purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And they all piped up and they said, no one. No one has a purpose. And I thought that was a little strange. Most people have a purpose in life. They wake up in the morning excited to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought I'd look into that a little bit, and I found some very interesting things. There's a number of studies. The one is called the Midas study. 7,000 people were participated in the study put on by the National Institutes of Mental Health. And they found that people with a purpose tend to be healthier, they tend to be happier, and they don't tend to be depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was interesting because we're pouring all kinds of money into mental health. We're trying to get mental health workers. And what's happened in a personal way is I have trouble finding psychiatrists for my patients. If someone is really sick and depressed, it takes 3 or 4 months to get someone into a psychiatrist. Mental health workers, social workers are also in a big demand. What can we do to make a difference that doesn't require more money and more personnel?
Uh-huh.
And I came up with finding your purpose. And there's lots of support for that. There's Jack Canfield also has a big proponent of finding your purpose and feels that it keeps people healthier and less depressed. So I think if people find a purpose, kids find a purpose, they are not going to be depressed, or they may get out of their depression. And it's not going to require meds and psychiatric work. However, that still is important because people that are really depressed will need some medications and will need some psychiatric work. But this may be a potential solution that doesn't cost anything.
Yeah. Okay, so how can it be applied to all of this in any kind of a way that will make a difference?
Let me tell you a story about myself as a kid. My parents were pretty accommodating. Anything I wanted to do that was reasonable and sometimes even unreasonable, they let me do it. So I did things like collect rocks, and I had a whole desk full of rocks breaking through the bottom of drawers and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that lasted for a few months. And then I got into balloons and ballooning, hot air ballooning.
Okay.
And they took me all around the country looking at balloon festivals. And I concocted a hot air balloon idea with a barrel that was filled with oil initially, but emptied out, thank goodness, before I started the fire in it. And then took the vacuum cleaner, put it upside backwards, and blew the air into the barrel. There were coals in the bottom, and then the hot air came out one side, and I attached.
How old were you when you did this?
Probably 10 or something like that.
Okay.
And the balloon was a weather balloon, and the trouble is it cooled off before it became too hot to fly.
Uh-huh.
So those are the kind of things that my parents let me do. And one of the things that I've observed,
you came from a big family too, didn't you?
One, I'm the only child, so I'm very spoiled.
Oh,
but I know I don't
okay.
look that way, do I?
Okay.
So what parents, and this has a lot to do with parents. Everyone's busy these days. And what I'm trying to propose is that it doesn't take much for a parent to get involved with a kid. And to find a purpose, what you need is to identify the kid's passion. Okay. What turns them on? And we've got 7 kids, so we've had all kinds of passions in our family. We've had writing, and we've had coloring, and we've had football and baseball and all kinds of things. And a purpose is something you can dedicate your life to that also would help others when you're doing that. What I've found is that if parents can get involved with the child, or anyone, it can be an uncle, it can be a neighbor, and find their purpose. Now, how do you talk to a kid about that? You don't, when the kid comes home from school, our kids, I can tell you a typical conversation, and that is, "Hi, Dane, how was your day?" "Good." "What'd you learn?" "Nothing." "What are you doing?" "Nothing." What we
Okay.
did, we live in a circular, it's a street, it's a circular street outside our house. So
Okay.
we walk around the street, it's a half a mile, and we take a walk.
All right.
And it's amazing what comes out when you take a walk with one of your kids.
Right.
They will then tell you what they're interested in, what their purpose is.
Right.
And they'll tell you what's happening in school. And that's how you identify the purpose.
You have a
Then
fishing story about that, right?
exactly. I'm glad you brought that up
Yeah.
because you wonder how much time you have to spend with the kids. Do you have to spend all your time? Everyone's busy. Do you have to spend 2 or 3 hours a day? And let me tell you the story about fishing.
Uh-huh.
I go to Phoenix quite a bit because we have 4 kids that live there and a dozen grandkids. So
Okay.
a couple of years ago, I took 2 of the boys out fishing. Now, you can imagine how many fishing holes there are in the middle of Arizona. Uh, I I think there was one. It was probably a waste deposit or something, but anyway, it was a fishing hole in the
Okay.
middle of Arizona, in the middle of Phoenix.
All right.
And they had the fishing poles, and the 2 little boys, they were probably 5 and 6, took the fishing poles, and no one hooked themselves. We hooked a couple trees, and we hooked a couple other things at the bottom of the pond that we were fishing at.
All
They
right.
didn't catch anything. And I thought to myself after we were done, this is a waste of time. I really feel sorry for the kids that I took them out fishing because they didn't catch anything.
Right.
And then what's interesting is 2 years later, one of the kids came up to me and he said, Grampy, I said, yes. And he said, that fishing trip we took a long time ago. And I said, yes. And he said, that was the best time of my life.
Wow. That's
Can you
incredible.
imagine?
Yeah, that's really
So
incredible.
the point, and they've been fishing since, they love it. And
Yeah.
so the point is, you don't have to expend lots of time and energy in many cases to find a purpose or a passion for a
Sure.
kid. And
You have
that's
another example too about
sure.
playing chess.
Yeah, we visit my other grandson who lives in Houston,
Oh,
and I was just happening to mention that I was a chess player in high school, and so we talked a little bit about that and how I like to play chess, and that was pretty much what we did. And then the next thing I know, he's learning chess, he plays chess, and now he's become a champion chess player,
wow.
and it's his passion to teach others how to play chess and to realize how much of an importance it is in growing up to learn rules, to learn competition. And and that wasn't a very major accomplishment that just talking to him about chess. So
Sure.
the point is, parents and significant others can do a little bit to encourage a passion, to encourage what the kids are passionate about, and
Mhm.
then turn that into a purpose and then use that purpose to help someone else in the world, like he's helping others learn how to play chess and enjoy that. So that's what seems to help prevent depression or to relieve depression. And it doesn't cost anything, and
Yeah.
anyone can do it. And my purpose
Yeah.
is to get others to realize that
Right.
because it's an under recognized treatment for depression. It doesn't require Prozac, it doesn't require a psychiatrist. It just requires a little bit of time and discovering a child's purpose. And if they have a purpose, they'll make a big difference in their lives.
Yeah, and it doesn't result in side effects. When you see all of these ads on TV about these drugs for people who are suffering from one form of depression or another, it always cracks me up because in the fine print that they read, it always says could result in serious depression, even suicide. That just is crazy to me. Why would you have drugs like that have those side effects? It's counterproductive, is it not?
Yeah, and one of the things that we see with the SSRI class of medications is that in teenagers, especially, they can have the opposite effect. So what has happened, and there's a black box warning on the drug write-up on those drugs, and what
Uh-huh.
has happened is that the kids are depressed, they're given one of these medications,
Yeah.
and then they can become worse. Now the
Right.
medications can be life changing though and life saving. So I think there's certainly a place for all these modalities. There's a place for drugs, there's a place for psychiatry. But my point is, if people get involved, anyone can get involved with a teenager, especially if they recognize that he may be a little, or he or she may be a little bit down.
Hmm.
They can turn around, and people can literally save lives. Uh,
Okay.
it's
You've adopted what, a couple of kids from Romania, did you?
2 from Romania and 1 from Chicago. Mhm.
Okay. How was it that you chose to adopt kids from Romania?
When my wife and I were dating, and we would have these lengthy conversations in the pottery room because I was a potter as a minor in college. So I would spend a lot of time throwing pots. And we'd talk about what we want to do with our lives. And we said, I think we're going to have, I think we're going to have a lot to offer these kids at some point in their future. And our goal was to raise good kids. And so far, we've done okay. I think no one's in jail. So it's a low bar that we set in our family. And so we thought, why don't we have some of our own biologic kids? And then why don't we adopt? And so we built a big house, like everything else in my life, big house, big dog, big pumpkins, big kites. And
yeah, I think I read where you have a dog that's 150 pounds.
That's Gracie. Yeah, she's very loving. It's a Newfoundland, and they're one of the most gentle giants. And but it goes along with our whole personality here of bigness. And so we.
Are you a big guy?
I'm about 6'2". I'm on a diet though, Bob, so I'll be less of a big guy in the future. So
you don't look like you need to go on a diet. Of course, all I can see is your face mostly, but nevertheless.
So Romania was a place where they were having kids that were living in orphanages. And so we went over there and looked at the orphanages. And one of the things that I discovered was it was a sad day because we were walking toward this orphanage where they had the kids. And about a block away, you could smell the urine.
Ooh,
Isn't that amazing?
Oh my.
They would change the diapers about once a day when they started to get wet up to their chin. And there was a room that, as a doctor, was very impressive to me. It was called the dying room. And when the kids got sick, it didn't have to be anything serious. It could just be a cold or something. They would put them in the dying room, and they would let them be there until they died. Now, the sink that was in the room had no soap. There was a bunch of kids. And the eerie thing about that orphanage was that the kids were quiet. Our kids are screamers. If you're not paying attention to them. Sure. But what happens in an orphanage like that is the kids don't get attention for crying. Yeah. So they stop crying eventually. And so this is an orphanage of 100 kids or so that is silent. That was the most eerie thing you can imagine. So we found 2 kids there that we thought we could provide a home for. And we said, we'll take them. And we adopted those 2 and then one other later on. And they've turned out to be a great joy in our life. It's been a wonderful experience. And at this point, I don't know which ones are adopted anymore. They're good and bad invariably, and they're pretty much all the same. So it's been a fun. And I think we had one, when you adopt kids that are multicultural like that, you run into some problems. And one of the problems that we see with depression is bullying. Okay. And my daughter, who's half black and half white, was bullied on the bus. She was in grade school. And it was a tremendous problem for her. And as you can probably imagine, the CDC says that kids that are bullied have a 2 to 9 times increased rate of suicide compared to normals. And so the older boys in the family tend to be the ones that are the protectors. So Nathan, who was a big-time football player, that was his purpose, got dressed in his football outfit with his big shoulder pads and walked onto the bus with Jordan. And he said to Jordan, who is the kid that's bullying you? She pointed the kid out, and Nathan, with his big football pads on and his big bulky body, he's also big, walked up to the kid and said, if you bully my sister anymore, you're going to answer to me. Yeah. And the surprising thing, Bob, there was no more bullying after that.
That's not surprising at all, I don't think.
So we've run into the same things that I'm talking about here with depression and bullying and how to get out of it.
What do you think parents should do if they suspect that their child is suffering from depression?
First of all, the things you look for with a child depression would be loss of interest in outside activities. They're not interested in their sports team anymore. They're not interested in reading or whatever they're doing. They lose interest in things. Yeah. Grades suffer in many cases. Mm-hmm. The kid may look depressed. There's a thing that we look at in the office when we interview people, and one of them is eye contact. They stop making eye contact. They look down. Okay. They feel depressed. They feel blue. And when they start talking about ruminating about death and dying and people that have died and things like that's a big red flag. One of the things we often ask in the office, we always ask, as a matter of fact, when we interview a person with depression is, have you considered doing yourself in? Have you considered suicide?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been shocked at some of the answers I get, because here's a person you're interviewing, they look pretty okay, and all of a sudden they come out with something like the kid I saw a couple of years ago, and he said, I've considered that, and I said, do you have a plan? That's also a big question to ask, because if a person has a plan, that makes it much more serious. And the kid said, I went into my dad's study the other day, and I opened the drawer, and he has a gun in his drawer. I took the gun out and it's not loaded. So I got the bullets from the other drawer and I loaded it. But then I decided that I'd just put it away for now. That kid was in the psych unit before you could know it, because he was seriously suicidal. So what can parents do? Again, if it's a serious depression, you contact your doctor, you contact a psychiatrist or someone like that. But if it's something minor, then I think this purpose business makes a ton of sense. Find out what they're passionate about. Find out what they like to do. When I interview kids in the psych unit, I will always ask them, what's your passion? What do you love to do? And they all have something they love to do. Sure. Like the last kid that I saw, a boy, liked to write. So I said to him, do your parents know about your writing? No. Why not? They're busy. I just didn't want to bother them with that.
Right.
So find what turns them on, find what turns your child on, and help them pursue that. Take them to a writing class, or if that's the case, if they like writing, if they like animals, get them over to an animal shelter where they can volunteer to feed the dogs and clean up the poop and whatever, to pursue their passion. And that makes a huge difference. When kids wake up in the morning with a purpose, they don't tend to be depressed. Or if they are depressed, that will go a long way. And it's free. It doesn't require a psychiatrist or drugs. It doesn't apply to everyone, but I think it can make a huge difference in many people's lives. And I think if parents and significant others realize this, they can make a difference. And you can literally save a life by doing this, by paying attention to the kid's passion and purpose.
Okay. Are there enough resources available to help kids, including at school?
There are never enough resources. We're always short of resources. You could always do more. But my point is, as a society, we throw so many resources at problems, and it's not always the money that makes a difference. It's learning what's important. And learning what's important is learning what's important to your kid or a child or a neighbor, if you recognize that. So that's the important thing. So that, again, doesn't require resources. Yeah. Resources are great, but if we get families, strengthen families, I think is the big thing. Strengthening the family and helping them realize that their kids need to have a purpose. That's what will go a long way and not require any resources.
Do you feel like schools should have more mental health professionals or mental health services available for students?
That would be great. That would be great. My daughter-in-law is a social worker in Texas, and she sees some absolutely incredible things. And the stuff that she sees is the tip of the iceberg. She sees the kids that have awful home situations where there's alcoholism and drugs and some really serious things that are happening. I think maybe what we could do is include that in the curriculum a little bit, something about mental health. But there's always a need for more mental health workers and resources. But I think strengthening the family is going to be a huge thing to help prevent this from happening.
Seems like that would also help out with kids who are faced with dealing with all of the divisiveness that is taking place in this country today. It's not up to the kids to deal with it, but they're certainly affected by it. I think about the school shootings and how that must affect kids, even kids who are not in that particular school, but in schools nearby, or they have their friends who have been affected in some way. That's got to be a major cause for this problem. Is that not true?
It is. Yeah. I think, I can think, it might be in 10 years ago, things weren't as divisive. I think blacks and whites got along a lot better, rich and poor. It wasn't a huge issue. I think what's happening in this country now is that we are facing forces that they're causing us to be divisive.
Yeah.
And it's a shame. And it does affect the kids. There's no question. What also affects the kids is the home situation where the parents may be fighting.
Yeah.
We're having lots of problems with the money situation now. We've got kids that are not off and they are just workaday kids. And they've got
Sure.
both the daughter and son-in-law are both working. And the money isn't coming in. And that is a great source of home strife and stress. And that affects the kids a great deal. And so there's a number of factors, but the divisiveness of the country is certainly one of those. I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Now, is there anything more on this topic you'd like to add? Because I wanted to ask you about your other Amazon bestseller, Physicians' Untold Stories, that you wrote.
Yeah, I think social media should be mentioned at least a little bit here, Bob, because social media presents kids that look like they're the perfect child. They have the perfect clothes, they have the perfect vacation, and everyone wants to get more and more alike. So I think that is a big part of this epidemic of depression in this country.
I'm sure that's true.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us about Physicians' Untold Stories in that book that you wrote.
Yeah, Physicians' Untold Stories is a book about miraculous experiences that happen in physicians' lives. Now, I happen to think that miraculous cures are a little boring these days, so I didn't include it except for one. But it's about physicians. And let me just give you an example of a story. There's a friend of mine who's an orthopedic surgeon who's also a trauma surgeon. And again, doctors were hesitant to tell these stories because these are ordinary docs that have regular successful practices. And they don't want people to think that they're strange or bizarre or have these premonitions. But this physician that I know was skiing in Colorado with his wife and his wife's sister. And they decided to go on a mountain that they'd never been on before. And when they got to the top of the mountain, a blizzard hit. The temperature went down 40 degrees. The snow was coming down so hard that they could hardly see what they were doing. But they had to ski down. So they started skiing down. And as they were skiing, they came across a grove of trees and they had to go to the right or the left. Now, Steve was the surgeon, went one way and the girls went the other way. I think Steve expected the girls to follow him like the nurses do and everyone else.
Right.
But they went the other side of the grove of trees. So Steve realized he had to ski through the grove of trees, and he's an expert skier. That wasn't a problem skiing on 5 feet of powder snow. But he got this funny, strange feeling in the center of his chest that he was being called to do something that was beyond usual. Okay. And so he stopped skiing. And he took his skis off, and then he didn't know what to do. So he started to walk up the mountain in the opposite direction from where the girls were waiting for him. He climbed up and up, and he got to a tree. And then under the tree is a big tree well. And when he looked down, he knew why he was there. There was a skier that had hit the tree, that was unconscious and being covered by snow. He was almost dead at the time because Steve was a trauma surgeon. He knew exactly what to do. He knew that he was in shock because he could feel a thready pulse. He called for anyone skiing down the mountain. One of the last skiers heard his cries and came to help him. Got the ski patrol. They hauled the shocky skier off to the hospital, and he survived. And I said to Steve, "What did you think about that, Steve?" And he said, "If you don't believe in something above that controls this, I don't know what you believe." And so he saved the skier's life. He splinted a broken leg that the skier had with a tree branch and some of his clothes. And the orthopedic surgeons at the hospital were impressed with his ability to splint the leg in the field like that. So it's a book of stories like that give you goosebumps. And I couldn't believe that the doctors had these stories, but they never share them except with me in this book.
Wow, that's amazing. I'd love to see that. That's just great. All right. Anything else you'd like to add?
I think just again, reiterate that parents and significant others can make a difference in kids' lives and be aware of what the passions are for the kids and help them discover their purpose.
Well, Dr. Kolbaba, thank you so much for being with us today on our podcast. I do appreciate it and enjoyed talking with you. You're a big guy and you got big things going on in your life, and I am grateful that you shared them with us. So thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Lean to the Left video and that you found it interesting and informative. Please visit on a regular basis and check out our interviews with guests on topics that focus on progressive politics and the important social issues of our time. Now, our interview shows stream on Mondays with special episodes on Thursdays. And you can check out upcoming shows, guests, and topics at podcast.leantotheleft.net. Subscribe to our audio version there and to our video shows here at YouTube. And follow us on social media. Facebook at Bob Gaddy and the Lean to the Left podcast. Now, it's two. Bob Gaddy is one Facebook page, and the Lean to the Left podcast is a second Facebook page. Twitter at Lean to the Left 1. Instagram at Lean to the Left 1. TikTok at Lean to the Left. LinkedIn at Bob Gaddy. And YouTube at Lean to the Left. Now, I hope you'll support Lean to the Left as well so we can keep things going. Just click on the Donate tab at the top of the leantotheleft.net homepage and contribute by buying me a cup of coffee. That'll really help and would be much, much, much appreciated. Now, this is Bob Gaddy signing off for Lean to the Left. Thanks for sharing your time with us.